Okay, well, I make it 4 o'clock. Precisely. So I'd like to welcome you all to our session on reducing friction between repositories, researchers and publishers in making research data open and fair. And this session is related to the ESIP COPT collaboration cluster. And hang on, it's not moving. Oh, okay. And just to start, I'd like to acknowledge and celebrate the Indigenous peoples on whose traditional lands we meet and pay our respects to their elders past, present and future. So what the hell does COPT stand for, you ask? It's the Coalition for the Publication of Data in the Earth and Space Sciences. And what are we discussing today? And we've just got a few issues and we really would love you to join in and contribute and say anything. If you go to the SCED notes, we've got the meeting notes and I've left a space for you to put anything in there. And also in the SCED notes, you will get the link to a Slido. And in the Slido, we'd like you, if you've got an idea on anything related to connecting better between publishers, researchers and repositories, to please put that idea forward. And so, as I said, we've got 3: raise awareness about much ESCS data available online is described as fair, but isn't. There's a lot of tensions between the recent requirements that a data set, if published in a paper, needs to have a DOI and be connected to a repository, and there's a lot of friction points starting to emerge related to the tension between those 3 groups. So if you've got any tensions you experience, add them to the notes. And more importantly, COPT has been going for some time, and we'd just like you to provide ideas where within ESIP, how can we effectively engage ESCS researchers and repositories to inform funders and publishers? So we've got a rather action-packed agenda for you. We're starting out with an introduction from Kirsten, who gives a history of the COPT group. And then we've got short presentations that I'll try and MC around a few people who've got known issues or just things that have come up connecting repositories to publishers, etc. And then I was kind of fascinated yesterday at the meeting where Susan asked us all to put things up that ESIP could be involved in. I was quite surprised at how many were there that listed publishers. So obviously there's a need. And this is your chance here to express them. And then we'll have a series of breakouts into as bigger groups as you want, or do it as one discussion group where we work out what the key messages are from this session, but more get guidance on the best way forward for ESIP to effectively engage these ESCS repositories, particularly now the CDF has joined ESIP. It's an opportunity for us to get a more collective view and present it to the publishers. Okay, so now I will pass over to Kirsten, which means, Kirsten, you have to share your screen. Do I have to stop sharing, or you? I think it'd be better if you've got it going. Stop sharing.
Okay, now Kristen, share with me.
Am I sharing? It's.
Yep.
Yeah.
Go for it.
Okay, well, welcome everybody. It's late here, so if I'm talking incoherently, that's probably excusable.
Have you got a glass of Sauvignon Blanc?
Bubbly, as
right,
usual.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, I don't want to hold up the meeting for long. Just for those who may not know, the origin of COPT It was a workshop held in 2015 at AGU that brought funders and publishers and repositories and some other stakeholders across societies who are publishers as well, and so on. About 80 people together who decided to continue holding events that would provide a forum for discussion among all these groups. So the intention of meetings was to build more consensus and consistent procedures among publishers, editors, funders, and data repositories with respect to the data from scholarly publications. There were obviously interests on all sides. The repositories wanted to make sure they get the data that they are funded for and can make them available in the best format and with best documentation possible. There is obviously the journals having an interest in running with compliant procedures related to open science and so on. So yeah, we're approaching 10 years of COPTIS next year, which is a sign to me that this dialogue is necessary and appreciated. But we have also noticed how the topics are evolving as the whole research data management landscape is evolving. New capabilities, new procedures, new rules show up along the path, and just the work that has been put into data citation, creating a framework for that has been enormous over that period of time over those 9 years. But what we also notice is that there are still many obstacles in fully implementing all the new guidelines, the requirements that have been created. And I think this is where COPTIS can really be a facilitator and driver of new procedures, and really ensure that we do move forward on an ongoing basis. I actually went back and kind of looked at what I had as my last slide decks from COPTIS meetings, and one was topics in 2020 that we looked at, and I think we're still focusing on many of the same topics. One is the synchronizing of publishing manuscripts and data, and making sure that the processing of a manuscript is coordinated with the data curation, with the timelines of data release, and so on. And I think there's, Danny later talking about that. We need to define what needs to be deposited, and I will briefly refer to that when I'm going to be talking about a recent meeting that was basically a COPTIS meeting, but on a much more discipline-specific basis. That also brought up, really was actually turned out to be the central topic, was the education of editors who really were insufficiently informed about the services and capabilities of repositories and so on. So I think we still have lots and lots of stuff to talk about. And, one of the topics, I think also being, the growing strain on resources at the repositories as submissions increase. And if we're really advocating for the journals, for the publishers to implement what they had promised to do and send researchers to repositories, we do need to figure out how the repositories can scale their resources up to serving the community. So I think I want to leave it at that and basically hand over to the next section in the agenda. If anybody has a question, I mean, I really didn't want to go back any further into COPTIS, but you know, we have successive projects that had to do with COPTIS, the enabling fair data that was run by Shelley at AGU and other efforts. But we are beyond that, and I think we should dive into the topics that are most urgent for us to solve today. So I stopped sharing, okay?
Okay.
Oh,
Good then.
how do we get on next slide?
What is happening on that? We have the tab open.
Yeah, we have the tab open.
Yeah. Let me go back to the tab.
Yeah, it's that one. Yep.
Cross that.
Okay, so we're going to start with a series of short lightning talks. And our first speaker will be Christina, who's going to present some interesting scene setting slides from a survey that AGU did.
Thanks, Leslie, and almost nobody ever attempts my last name. I'm Christina Brown. I'm with the AGU. I'm the program manager of Open Science, and I was asked to give a little bit of a brief overview today about what we've been seeing at the AGU, publisher of 23 journals, as we implement policies about data and software citation to sort of illuminate this discussion about publishers and repositories. So a little bit of background about the AGU. We have 25 sections across the Earth and Space Sciences. We have 60,000 members internationally, and we publish 23 journals. So we're a big publisher in the Earth and Space Sciences. This is about 7,000 to 8,000 articles per year. The work at AGU has been doing around data and software citation in conjunction with COPTIS has been going on for a long time and predates my time at AGU. The project I'm going to talk about today is called Accelerating Open and Fair Data Practices. It was funded by the NSF and is a continuation of earlier work designed to help implement data and software citation across AGU journals, move us from having a policy to actually enforcing that policy and giving guidance to our authors and to our editors on how to best share their data and software in AGU journals. The grant is designed to enable and to track data and software citations, as well as author information and grant identifiers. We're also looking at repository usage across AGU journals, and we're working on staff and editor training. Because there's a lot of staff time and there's a lot of editor guidance that needs to happen, as Kirsten mentioned. So a brief overview of our policies. These policies actually were effective for new submissions as of August 2019. However, that grant that I just mentioned, that's as of 2020. The grant enabled us to start enforcing these policies. So we implemented them, we saw what happened, and we realized the need for this extra guidance for authors, extra training for editors, and extra support for our staff to actually implement this. Our policies are now that data and software should be deposited in a community accepted trusted repository, preferably for DOI, but we don't mandate that. That authors include a data availability statement in their open research section in every AGU publication. A data availability statement contains information about how to access the data and software that they used in their paper. And that they cite the data set or the software in the reference section of the paper with a bracketed description flag that helps us track data sets and software through infrastructure, making sure that authors of the data set, authors of software get credit for their work. We have 7,000 to 8,000 papers being published a year at AGU. It doesn't sound like it would be that hard to enforce for our publication staff, but I've heard estimates from our publications team that this added as much as 15 minutes per paper for staff as they came up to speed on enforcing these, did detailed checks of the open research section and of the data availability statement, and followed through links that authors were providing to make sure that they weren't orphans. 15 minutes doesn't sound like a lot, but over 8,000 papers, that's 2,000 hours of staff time a year, which is a full-time employee. So this has been significant for us to implement across AGU. We're still in the process of rolling out this pilot across all our journals, but by the end of 2023, all our journals will be enforcing these policies. We also run an email, datahelp@agu.org. This is primarily used by staff and editors, and it serves as a hotline for anyone with a tricky question about data, whether that's big data or data with privacy concerns, to email us and for us to help them figure out a way to comply with our policies. This data is a little bit about how the pilot enabled by that grant has been going across AGU. This data goes back to 2021, and we've been seeing data and software citations increasing across AGU since we implemented these new policies in 2019. When the pilot began in the January of last year, we saw these software citation and data citations really jump up as we started enforcing them across our journals. We think this was enabled by the support for that grant for the extra staff time, because authors really need that extra nudge and extra information about how to comply with our new policies. Now coming to the topic of this session, where is that data and software going? Obviously, we implement these policies. We tell authors, okay, now you have to share your data and software. We haven't told them where they should share it, except that we hope they do it in a repository of a DOI. We've looked at each year of the pilot so far. This is 2022 data. And this graph represents the top 10 repositories across all AGU journals in 2022. So when our authors choose to share their data and software, these are the repositories that they're choosing to share it in. These top 10 represent 70% of all the repositories that were mentioned in 2022 in AGU journals. So this is a significant swath of that data. You can see that Zenodo is capturing a huge majority of data sets and software that's being shared at AGU. I think the number across every single data set or software citation that was shared in 2022 is something like 50% ended up in Zenodo. So breaking down that top 10, you can see generalist repositories in general. So defining that as repositories in yellow here that are not domain specific. They're capturing 75% of that top 10. Domain repositories are sitting at less than 25%. And since we implemented the policy and started tracking enforcement, we've seen since 2019 to 2023, we have preliminary data for 2023 through Q2. We've seen the share, these arrows are switched. It's embarrassing, I did it at midnight last night. Domain repository share is decreasing. Generalist share is increasing. So since we implemented these policies, we've seen especially Zenodo, but other generalist repositories continually increasing in their share of data sets and software shared by AGU authors in our publications. So I'm sharing this because our mission at the AGU, we don't want to just share open data and open software. We want it to be findable and accessible and interoperable and reusable. We want our authors to be able to reuse that data, reuse that software, and we want to make sure that we can direct them, that we can support them, that we can guide them to the right ways to making that data and software not just out there, but actually contributing to science. So I'm excited to see from the rest of the speakers and from the discussion in this session, any feedback to this data. I'll also be sharing some more data on a poster at the Research Showcase. If you have questions about this presentation, you can feel free to ask me now if there's time, or come find me at my poster later. Thank you.
Forward changing back to first and this, wow. 2 questions. I'll take one from you at the back and then one from Mark, okay?
So your statistics were on the top 10, but domain repositories are generally going to be small. If you included all of them, would that change much, or is it basically not very many besides
It changes.
the top 10?
I think if so it's difficult to analyze every single repository because when we go through the citations, there's so many individual repositories represented. If I look at the top 50, which is pretty much a huge fraction of all of our citations, then that number falls to being 64% generalist, and then concomitantly domain. So it's still an extremely large fraction being shared in generalist repositories.
Okay, not quite as bad though.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, but I'm very skeptical of your data. That's what you're saying, is that nobody is using the holdings of the major domain repositories, the satellite repositories, et cetera.
Coming in more.
And we know that's not true.
That's coming in more.
So are they just not, like, if somebody uses Landsat data or MODIS data, are they just not citing it and they're only citing the long tail stuff?
So I'd love to talk about data analysis. For this data, what we've done is looked at our open research statement and found DOIs. Anyone who's complying with our specific policy, putting it in the right place at the right time. So we may not be capturing every single use of those data sets. We're measuring enforcement of our policies in the best way that we can.
But sure, no, yeah, don't take this as too critical, but so I could see where somebody would say, well, we compared, this long history of MODIS snow cover data with that available from NSIDC with this field campaign data, Smith et al. Zenodo.org. And so the one gets cited and the other one doesn't, because it's just sort of accepted as a community data set or something like that. But you're not like going through line by line and saying, oh, they should have cited that. Right. Okay. You're just reading the data availability statement, pulling out the DOI, seeing where it goes.
That's right.
Okay. I
Can
remain.
I just quickly ask a question to clarify something here? I was under the impression that the numbers you showed were the totals and percentages of submissions to those repository in conjunction with a publication. So it's not citing data that were used for a study, but data that were generated and reported as part of a study. I see that two different things,
I think we agree. Yes, it's if the authors took a subset of a larger data set and then uploaded that, that would be a new citation. And we do ask them if they are using a larger data set to cite that in a data availability statement, but we are not doing line by line checks. We're doing like a very broad analysis of all our publications.
So we need to.
I've got the microphone, so I'm going to ask the next question here.
Sorry, we need to move on. So can you make it quick, because then we can go and bring these up in the general discussion.
Yeah, so I really enjoyed your last statement there that you would like your data to be fair. I do wonder, do you consider data in a general repository to be findable, interoperable, and reusable? I know they're accessible. I don't argue that, but do you?
No.
So how do you get there? How do you get to?
Next talk. So
Okay, all right.
Preston, share your screen and get onto the INR, please.
Oh, is it me? I can't hear you very well. Okay, maybe I don't even need my slides to
go for it.
Okay, I mean, I'm just gonna kind of talk in continuation of this discussion that just started, because I think this is one of the critical points for the work of COPTIS. COPTIS' goal really was to make sure that data is handled, is curated, reviewed, stored, and made accessible through domain repositories. And so this INR topic that I wanted to address is really, we have in the Enabling Fair Data project, we have always acknowledged that we were primarily focusing on findability and accessibility of the data through, having DOIs, having them registered in index data repositories and so on. But we were not able to dive into the question of how interoperable and how reusable the data are. And we had many discussions and clearly acknowledged that both the interoperability and more specifically even reusability depend on community standards that are specific to the domains that the data are generated in or that they are used in. So this was a critical point that we actually had a couple of sessions way back, I think plenary 12 and 13, talking about how can COPTIS support the development of domain-specific standards. We know that there are quite a number of efforts going on, and these are just two examples of domains that have taken action to establish interoperability standards that make it possible to link and to integrate data from a global network of repositories. And so COPTIS needs to, I think, be quite involved and support these domain-specific activities. And, you know, I have later another slot to talk a little bit about the geochemistry efforts, but I would love to see more discussions in this forum on how we're going to make sure that we're truly making data fair through COPTIS with a focus on the reusability, because I think that reusability is the key for a sustainable research data infrastructure that shows what the impact of proper data curation can be on science. If, you know, if the data aren't usable, we don't really have to invest as much into the data curation. And so that was my point here, that I wanted, and I think it was nice to see this discussion starting after the last segment.
This one? Okay. Right. Thank you, Kirsten. All right. No, not that one. Okay. So we've done Kirsten. Another one I want to do, which is kind of answering an issue that Mark raised, and I'm calling it the growing friction of the invisible repository syndrome. What the hell are you talking about, Wyborn? Okay, we're alerting publishers the growing friction of this issue. So what's the problem? In modern research, it's rare for someone to go out and collect a set of data and write a paper. That's, you know, old hat. That's what we used to do 40 years ago or 50 years ago. Oof, how long ago it was. And you got these complex processing chains, and particularly where HPC is involved, it is more likely that an individual research product is generated through multiple levels of processing as raw instrument data is converted to more useful parameters and formats. Each level of processing can be undertaken by different research groups using a variety of funding sources and stored in different repositories. So this is the issue that publishers are only asking for the DOI of the data set that goes with the publication. And that is tending to be what goes in the dataability statement. The repositories that host the primary data and lower level products become invisible. And I know one group from a major seismology repository in Europe who submitted a paper to a journal. Is anyone who publishes, or publishers don't come to from Nature, who was asked to not use the repository DOI, but would he please put his data set in Zenodo so he could get a DOI for the data. I kid you not, it is a true story. So apart from the fact that there are big repositories that rely on funding and proof to their funders of what they're doing and the impact of the data that they're storing. If we don't do something, because I work at one of these, we're in trouble. And therefore, we need to actually get republishers to insist on the primary data sources to be stored and cited as well. And this is just something I did ages ago to try and figure out where the hell this ASTA data set over here in the blue that we were storing at NCI, and then we're getting copies of it from over here, and we're trying to work it out. And it turned out that like you had the original mission from NASA, the level 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, the products that were available in different formats from different levels of items. And of course, it's only these ones over here that are getting cited. The ones over on the left, the repositories, the really big ones are invisible. So what can we do about it? We need to encourage editors and publishers to look closely at any data set submitted to a publication and determine if there are prehistory data sets, and ensure these are cited in the data availability system. Ensure lineage and prehistory is recorded in provenance statements at a minimum. And as we move into the machine-to-machine age, let's start using metadata elements such as is derived from and the DOIs for the prehistory layers, because that will also tell you where the data set is stored. Noting that for data products in general, it's repositories. None of these things are very easy to do in a machine actionable way. It's impossible. But recording these is all fundamental to transparency and reproducibility of any data sets and results in a publication. In a publication, you always reference pre-existing literature and ideas. Why the hell aren't we doing this for data sets in a way that they can be picked up for citation? End of my story. Right. I need you again because I'm going to go back. Come on, get back up here. Kirsten, get ready for your third and final. Well, Ted did have a question at the last one.
Oh, wait, I have,
Yeah.
hold on, Ted. Yeah.
Danny,
So
go.
one more. So,
Chad,
so
get Kirsten. Oh, she started. Right.
from,
Sorry.
from Mark, just one second, so one of the issues I think is here in this circumstance that you're talking about, the invisible, I feel like the funders have a role in this. And I saw that Alan Pope is on the call, and I'm wondering if he might be able to comment on this. But for our repository in oceanography, in Geo, we frequently get people who want to quickly deposit just the statistical analysis. And we have to go back and say, we'll take that. And if it's in Zenodo, we'll even identify it as related to or a reference of a larger data set that we want to curate domain creation. I think the issue is that that takes too long for people. And that's why they go to Zenodo for that instant DOI for publication. And connecting, it's not a problem to connect the statistical stuff to the larger data set, but we need to have the larger data set come in, and people aren't willing to do that. You have to prod them.
But you can you while you're passing the microphone to Ted, because I don't get Ted upset.
Get Ted upset.
In your repository, in the big repositories, they can cite the statistical data set that's in Zenodo, but can Zenodo cite the data set that it was sourced? Can it? Or right? Okay, good. That's improved. Go, Ted.
Hi, this is Ted Haberman. This is, what you're basically saying is that understanding the provenance of these data sets is important. And you're suggesting that the data site metadata schema with is derived from might be a mechanism for describing that provenance. But actually it's probably the weakest mechanism that we have, because not only does ISO 19115 have a very nice expressive mechanism for expressing provenance, but there's also an entire language called prov developed. And so we should not be upset at the publishers here because they're also because they're not giving us prov in DataCite. They have a mechanism in DataCite which is called has metadata, which is another relation that like your is derived from. So the data set in DataCite can point to more detailed metadata for that data site. And I would suggest that that's where this prov remain, where the responsibility for describing the provenance in detail remains. So the problem is not the journals in this case. It's not DataCite in this case. It's the scientists that refuse to put provenance into their metadata for their data sets, because that's really where you want to look. And that would include in the sources in the prov, the DOIs of the contributing data sets.
Okay, so first thing, sorry, I didn't mean to just have DataCite. I meant to also say Provo, and there are options for doing that. But again, it's getting the scientists to do it. Now, we are noticing coming through our repositories, I don't know whether the rest of you are seeing this, we're starting to get ginormous lineage statements, but they're, text rich without a single identifier in them. And so for the modern world, they're next to near useless. I'll let Mark have the floor, and then we've got to get on to Kirsten because we've still got to hear from Danny, and then you guys have got to do
Mark's
some work.
already upset at me, so
No, as usual, I agree vehemently with
You
Ted.
monitoring, sorry, just before you start, are my co-people monitoring the chat?
Yeah,
Yeah, you're monitoring the chat, right? Okay, go,
Yep.
Mark.
Sorry, I didn't introduce myself before. I'm Mark Parsons,
No, you
NASA
won't
Chief
go.
Science Data Office. I think Ted's absolutely right, but that's also a really big burden. And it's not just up to the scientists to enable the provenance. The repositories have to help them with that. And this isn't part of writing a paper. I think I think your last point, Leslie, is the key one, is that it's just not part of the culture to cite data, and they're only doing it in the last minute way that Danny described to meet the requirements of the journal, not because they're trying to do good scholarship. Good scholarship would be that they would cite their sources, all of them, not just the publications, but that culture hasn't been in there. And it's just another little hoop that they see that they have to jump through, rather than thinking about, oh, I need to make sure that my science is verifiable, so I need to reference my sources. And that seems to me is the gap, rather than the scientists aren't doing complex provenance lineage.
Yeah, no. Look, we better move on. So take the floor, please, Kirsten, or take the screen.
thanks. You see it, right?
Yep, no problem.
So basically, with this meeting that we just had a week or so ago in Lyon in France at the Goldschmidt conference, COPTIS went back to its roots because it originated in the editors roundtable of geochemical data repositories meeting with publishers that publish geochemical studies. And we felt this was necessary because there are, as I pointed out earlier, there are initiatives now, such as the One Geochemistry initiative, to develop standards and make sure that this is done in alignment with the publishers and understand where the publishers or the editors actually still having problems. So we brought together a bunch of people for this meeting, some with new diamond open access journals. So it was a great discussion. And we had planned a number of topics. As shown here, we know there was a new data policy at Geochimica, Cosmochimica Acta, for example, and so on. But in the end, all these topics got taken over, and let me, and just for the sake of time, skip that one, into discussions that really revealed how much information was lacking for editors. They did really not understand how much the repositories can do, what they can do, the issues of authentication of restricted access to data during the review process, and so on. So it turned out, us as the repositories providing more information, providing lists of repositories that meet required features and so on, or telling them what the recommendations of the Enabling Fair Data Project are, that's what they were really looking for. We had discussions that showed, that review of the data and quality control of the data done by domain repositories was really exciting for them, because they felt they were responsible for something that didn't fit into the resources that they have, the time they have to handle manuscripts. They clearly felt that authors also needed clearer instructions, because some journals still expect the data to be in the papers as supplements. And so the authors are confused and don't understand why they have to do things twice and so on. Ultimately, the biggest topic in the end turned out a discussion about how do we better and fully actually integrate the process of manuscript submission and review with the process of submitting data to repositories, to make sure everybody knows are data submitted, where are they in the review, that timelines are better coordinated, and so on. And again, this leads to what Danny will talk about later. There were concerns brought up by the editors from smaller journals, smaller publishers, about the costs of potentially having to modify manuscript management systems. And there was even an editor who said, well, shouldn't the repositories pay us as publishers to change the management system? That did not fall onto realistic further discussions. So there were other questions that I think are probably going to happen in other domains as well, if you dive into the details of actually managing all this. Big question in geochemistry right now is what to do about images, because they are becoming a major component of geochemical research. How are they stored? Where are they stored? Because they are big, there are raw data and so on. There were questions that, like this, how can the reanalysis of a sample be linked to previous or future data for that sample? It's like, well, we have persistent identifiers. If you would make sure this is implemented, this would be solved. So again, this process of continuous information is so important. And I really think that this sort of fine-grained level of discussion within the domains directly with the editors is a critical part of what COPT should be doing. I think that's it. Yep. Those were just a few.
Okay, so Danny?
I'll stop sharing again.
That's the one on the right.
That's the bottom that I can go. Yeah.
Okay.
Screen changing.
Okay. All right. So Danny Kincaid with Biological and Chemical Oceanography Data Management Office, or BCO-DEMO. And what I'm going to present is some work that has been primarily happening between the ESIP and RDA, Earth, Space and Environmental Sciences IG, ESESIG, at the Research Data Alliance. Lots of acronyms. So, and let's see which one. All right. So this primarily deals with what we were just talking about, a challenge between domain repository operations and the process of the scholarly publication manuscript. Each organization, each entity has their own workflows, and they're not well aligned, if at all. And so I've been talking about this, and maybe the best thing to do is to go on to this. I've been talking about this for a little while now, and you probably heard me up here a couple of ESIPs now. And if you go to RDA, you probably heard me talking about it at RDA too. So what we're finding is the domain repositories, and I know Kirsten has experienced this as well. We have a challenge when an author, a PI, comes at the last moment and they've already submitted their manuscript to a journal, to a publisher, and they say, oh my gosh, I just submitted it, it's in review, but I need a DOI now. And so domain curation, as we all know, takes a long time. It's not something that you can just crank out the DOI and go. We can reserve DOIs. We have the capability of doing that. But once you give them their DOI, they're never coming back. And so, so we don't want to do that. We can do that. We don't want to do that because we won't get metadata. We won't get that collaborative data quality on an observational data level. So what to do? We're backed up already, you know, we're drowning in data already. And then we have these last minute, oh my gosh, I need the DOI. And we say, we might not be able to do that for you. We can give you the data availability statement. We can help you craft that, but we're not going to give you a DOI yet. Or we can, but it's not going to resolve to anything. We're not giving it to you live. And so they'll say, okay, and they go off to Zenodo or they go off to Dryad. And then that problem is kicked down until for National Science Foundation and my repository, they come up for an annual report and NSF says, not in Dryad, you know, it's in Dryad, not BGODemo. And so that causes downstream impacts as well. So there's a lot of friction here. I started kind of asking around if anybody else was having this problem during COVID. And there were a couple of people who said, yeah, actually, that is a problem. And then I started socializing it here and there, Fall AGU, and people are sort of nodding and saying yes, but I really didn't have a lot of bandwidth to get it going. AGU and COPTIS had a publishers workshop. It was presented there and actually had some great response. Like, yeah, this is worth digging into. And so all along, I've been sort of formulating this with the help of AGU and some of the COPTIS touch points to generate some content that might help. And that kind of looks like a ESESIG working group that could address this topic. We had our first meeting, so I've kind of rallied the troops. We had a first meeting in February. People were on board with this. I drafted in the RDA space what's called a case statement so I could start a working group. And I have this draft case statement. This group of would-be followers helped me edit this, and that's where we got as far as March of this past year. And the things that we're trying to do in our case statement kind of look like this. We want to establish a connection between the repositories and the publishers and kind of share these common workflows so that we all understand where we're coming from. Because right now, I don't think these two groups talk to each other. I want to create a visual model of how the publication workflows look like on both sides. So data, scholarly publication. Educate and inform stakeholders. That looks like the PI, the journal, and the repositories about all these mutual needs. Document a set of use cases, and then create a set of recommendations. That's it. The check marks here are things that I've already been working on and started to share with this emerging working group. And that looks like workflows. So came up with this. This has been presented at ESIP already. It's too tiny to see, but it's just kind of, hey, there's something here already. The other one is the publisher workflow. With the help of AGU and that publisher workshop, we got down to when the availability statement's necessary, when you actually need the data to be available to the peer reviewers, and when the DOI is necessary. That's all been kind of fleshed out already. Kind of need to kick the tires on it and revise it, but I need people. And then we already came up with a set of recommendations as well. And ESIP helped 3 ESIPs ago, maybe. And you all provided great feedback, and I refined these recommendations from one of these session breakout groups. So recommendations kind of are, they're not earth-shattering. It's really just sort of a communication issue. So if repositories can provide a way for peer reviewers to anonymously, confidentially access the data, and many domain repositories, however small, can figure out how to do this. We have since I've started working on this, and provide that confidentially. And then for journals, for publishers, help the authors understand these timelines and and this could be expanded actually, because helping them find a appropriate repository, I don't know that we've nailed that yet either. I think a lot of authors are still kind of figuring out what to do if they don't get direct guidance from their funder or some other institutional guidance or whatever. They are going to Zenodo or going to Figshare or Dryad. Give them a sense of timing, and then inform repositories. Let them know what their needs are for peer review. If they do need share links, if they do need other things, start to have a dialogue. Okay. Yes. So we're also connecting to existing work. We know that we don't want to reinvent the wheel. We know that there's a lot of stuff that's already been done in the RDA space, publishing workflows. That was something that was done back in 2016, but it was an idealized, hey, wouldn't it be great if data publication looked like this? It's not really what happens on the ground at a lot of repositories. So that's informed, but we need to modify that. And it needs to connect to the scholarly publication. Data policy and standardization and implementation interest group. I've just connected with them recently. That actually does have publishers in it, which is great. RDA fair sharing working group. And there might be another one that's coming out. Yeah, the repository attributes working group. So we're connecting to, or I'm digging into these other working groups to try and see how they relate to this problem and what can be leveraged there. So really, this is like a plea that if this resonates with you, I would love to have some help on doing this. And it sounds like on the publisher side, we're just learning that this is now something they want too. So this is great. Maybe we can actually connect. I don't know that ESIP doesn't garner publishers as a matter of course to have the dialogue together. So I would love ideas about where those spaces are, where repositories and potentially funders, I don't know, but bringing them all together to kind of start this dialogue would be great. That's all I have.
2 questions for you from the chat.
You're reading, she's reading. Oh,
Alan asks you if it comes down to what power you have. For you, it's the DOI for NSF approving reports. Comment. And then question, Rama, are you in here? Rama has a question.
okay.
What do you have on your list regarding informing authors of papers about advantages of putting their data in domain repositories rather than Zenodo or Figshare?
Yeah, I mean, I think that would be great. I think that does need to happen. I think that helping authors determine the appropriate repository is sort of like an age-old, I don't know, it's the other shoe that hasn't dropped. It's trying to figure out the best avenue to do that. I think for my particular repository, we have a great relationship with our NSF program managers in the divisions and programs that we support. So they help us. And I think that's a great role for funders. I think we can come at it, help authors from all angles though, publishers, repositories, funders. I think we could all play a role there. I'm not going to choose people, but I don't know who. Yeah, go ahead. The person with the. And you want to break out soon, right?
Yeah. I was thinking actually earlier in earlier presentation, we heard about looking at the statistics on Zenodo versus other repositories and so on. And I think the analysis was just looking at data availability statements. I'm not sure they were looking at the actual citations and the DOIs used in the citations and done the analysis, because we have found that a lot of our NASA data sets are being used and cited that way. And we look at the DOIs to count, to get the metrics.
Christina, do you want to answer that or? Hang on, Christina can answer just let Christina answer Rama's question.
I'll just say that we do look at DOIs, but they are the DOIs that are in the data availability statement. So if it doesn't end up there, it's not being captured in our analysis.
And what's in the data availability statements for not being captured in our analysis.
Hi, Steve Diggs, University of California, CDL. You're not gonna like what I'm gonna say, but I'm gonna say it anyway. The fulcrum's in the wrong place. It's not the lazy researcher who won't adopt and do metadata. There's no incentives. I'm now spending times in the lab with various researchers, and there is a low level of awareness of any of this. This is all brand new to 90% of the researchers out there. And if they know it, it's not real. There's no funding agency enforcement. It's not tied to tenure. All the things that make academic institutions go, all the stuff we talk about has nothing to do with it. We need to get in and raise the level of awareness, and we need to provide the poor researcher who is oversubscribed and underfunded with incentives. And then we are ready. We will be ready with robust metadata models to make all of this stuff go. But if we're talking about the low levels of compliance, why won't they show up and why won't they do it? It's not because any of these researchers are lazy. It's because they don't know and they don't have incentives.
I didn't say they were lazy, and I'm not even disagreeing with you. I'm saying the education process needs to happen from a bunch of different avenues, just like the data science that everybody's bringing, the floats all boats, right? I mean, I think that's relatively new too. I mean, the carpentries are taking off for a reason, and the culture of how we publish our data is novel, right? So I'm not disagreeing with you at all. I'm saying, how do we move the ball forward from here?
Just before we start, because we've sort of got more discussion than we thought we'd get, or what we've got from previous COPT sessions. Don't go away, Danny, you're not off the hook yet. Look, can you all, the Slido link is in the Kincaid chat, it's in the SCED. If you go to that, can you see that? It's what's the best way within ESIP to effectively engage with earth, space and environmental science researchers and repositories to collectively inform publishers and probably researchers of the issue? Can you all start typing your ideas in there? Because we're kind of at a break point where I was going to suggest that we go into smaller breakout groups, but we've only got half an hour left. My other suggestion is that if you've got ideas, can you start pumping them in there? And then maybe we just keep this as one big discussion group. Would that be what people would like? Yep, sounds like a plan. Right, now you may go and ask your question. Danny, you can't sit down and see what he's asking. What? COPT. Sorry, forgot about that. Yeah. If you can't find it through that, the final straw is, let's go back to, go to slido.com and use the code COPT. So please just dump your ideas, and hopefully we can filter them. And maybe Susan, how the hell do we show those results the way you were the other day? Or I don't know. So anyway, let's start the discussion going while we deal with technical.
I have one question that may be a little bit more fundamental in terms of, I work a lot with a repository that focuses on long-term data sets, high quality, curated, full speed ahead. Okay, as a researcher, I go and download this data set, and I pull 3 sites out of it. And then I go to this other data set and I pull 3 sites out of it. But then when I go to publish it, I'm asked for a data set that includes that. So now I'm creating a new data set that contains those parts from this data set, parts from that data set, that may have, be very complex, that may be that, and then if I submit that back to the repository, what we've now got is a mixture of very focused data sets around one paper versus long-term data sets focused on, general purpose. And I'm curious about that.
This is the second session in a row I've been dealing with this. There's a new RDA working group set up, and it's again come out of AGU. And I think, Susan, we need to come and bring this group to ESIP. It's called the Complex Citation Group. And what you do is you create a reliquary. You know, a reliquary is a bag of bones. So what you do is you create a container in which you can put multiple objects. And so exactly your scenario of like, okay, I go out in the field, I collect pink rocks, blue rocks, and black rocks. I write a paper on the pink rocks or the blue rocks, and all the rocks have got identifiers, but each bag that I do a paper on goes into a reliquary with a DOI. And now we're just trying to work with the publishers, etc., so that the individual items within that can be cited. And hang on, yeah, so that's on its way. So it's the RDA Complex Citation Working Group. Join it and bring your use case to us. Sorry, Ted, you're going to have to wait for the gentleman. Sorry, which one?
Right here.
Oh, yeah, Andrew, go ahead. Sorry, thank you. I can't run that mic. He's doing that, so someone else is going to have to run the mic. Yeah, okay, go on. Sorry, I'm just saying for the next one. Thank you, Danny. Right, go, Andrew. I'll shut up.
I guess I've got a lot of questions, but I'll start with this one. Do you, maybe Shelley or someone else in the room can answer this? Do you see journals taking the Springer Nature model of required data types that have to have certain repositories? Or
so let me rephrase your question. Do I think publishers should tell researchers where to preserve their data? Oh, hell no. So we talked, there was a little conversation on chat about what a fair aligned repository is. And the fact is, it's really complex. When researchers come to the data help desk, one of the primary questions they ask, and the data help at agu.org, where should I put my data? And the resources for doing that, we try to build some for enabling fair data. And what we realized by doing that is the really easy to use repositories are generalist because they're not asking much of you. And they're there to fill a role, and we need them. We have institutional repositories, we have national repositories, and then we have the repositories that help the earth and space sciences reuse and interoperate on their data. And those are the discipline and domain repositories, which I have to believe is probably most of you in this room. But it's really rough trying to get a researcher to go use you. So when we first started sending researchers to RE3 data into a tool we called Repository Finder, not even by and large, 100% of them came back to us after 3 hours and said, we couldn't figure it out. What country are you in? If your team is international, which institution are you in? Who's your funder? Where are you going to publish, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So I know the folks at Nature. I know why they created their list. There was a moment in time where they were going to abandon it altogether. They don't want to manage it. They don't want to go through the process of figuring, like Bicodema did it recently, and it was a pain. I heard the other side of the going through the process. They don't want to do that. But what they don't have is a really good guide at a discipline-specific level internationally, because our teams are not domestic, they're international. How do we guide them? So there isn't a good resource. But the work that's coming out of the Open Science and Data Help Desk, the work that's happening within ESIP at large and RDA could lead to better recommendations. The work Danny's talking about, how do we communicate with a researcher, not at the time they're about to write a paper, but ahead of that to help them understand the value of preserving their entire project. All of, that they early. And what is that value statement for belonging to a domain repository community, and what will they get out of it as well as what they've put into it? And this is one of the quotes coming out of the Open Science recommendation. You as a researcher get out of Open Science what you put into it. And trying to put some bumpers around the word open because it frightens researchers, because how many researchers do you know that truly start a research project openly inviting everyone in? Zero, mostly zero. It just doesn't happen. They are closed to a point and then they're open. And it's not a binary. What was the question?
I think, Nick, did you want to respond to something earlier?
I just wanted to respond to your idea about like basically compilate, well, he's not paying attention. John? I was just going to say, when you're doing a compilation of the data sets, right? And you want a citation back. Of parts. Right. So you need to have a subset of that. Okay.
I mean, so in principle, given the fact that our code that is pointing back to the original data set, I got your providence there that somebody could reproduce. So there's a question of, reproducing the paper versus making sure that the data that came from it is available.
Right.
Versus.
So if you just point back to the data set, that's what our data repositories do. So if you have a compilation, you can have a reference back to the data set, but not the exact subset.
Okay, can you perhaps take this offline? Because, and then Susan, give it to Matt, and if you don't give it to Ted, you're going to be in trouble next. Go, Matt.
Maybe I'll give a question for Ted too. So Matt Mernick from NCAR. So I just want to take the numbers from Christina from AGU at face value. I mean, it's even acknowledging the questions that Mark and Rama made about whether they're accurate or not. They're entirely consistent with what I'm hearing from scientists about what they're hearing from publishers. Okay, we've had many people ask about Zenodo because the publishers tell them to go to Zenodo. So maybe the numbers aren't perfect, but I bet that's quite correct.
Yeah, well, that's the example we had from Iris.
Yeah.
Where they were told to take it out of an Iris with a DIY and put it in Zenodo.
We've heard the same thing, right? NCAR is not a trustworthy repository, put it in Zenodo or OSM.
Yep.
So what I want to say here is this conversation is making me think of, in a different context, the conversation we have about search, where we spend tons of time building search systems, spending lots of time making them good, and then we look at our metrics and it's all coming from Google. So should we be spending so much time on search? Well, probably not. We should be spending on how to make these things really visible in Google, or finding a balance there. So there's no going back to Zenodo, right? The ship has sailed. Not that every data set should go there, or that we should stop doing what we're doing, but maybe there's things that we can do to sort of make those data more fair as well. And what I'm thinking about, or maybe going to Ted, is there's been some great sessions here about metadata editors, metadata checks, metadata quality assessment, all of these things. There's got to be a way that we could figure out some tool that looks at Zenodo DOIs and says, here's the fair kind of compliance of a Zenodo data set. Give that to AGU to have their, the people who are spending 15 minutes looking at these things to make a check and say, hey, go back to your scientist and say, you don't have a title. Maybe add a title to your Zenodo data set before we publish your paper. So this is all, I'm speculating here, but maybe we need to have some conversations about all these data sets that are going to Zenodo. How do we make them better?
While Susan's moving the mic to Ted, can I also just look at the top question? Because just the history of, as you saw, Danny has been bashing her head against a wall. She's had, sessions here for about 3 years, 2 years. But this has been the problem we found, and no reflection on you, Susan. Try as we may, we have not been able to get publishers to come to ESIP sessions. But we clearly need to get the connection. So any ideas here would be welcome. I'll just kick off one, and hopefully more will come through, is that we've got all the repositories now through the CDF joining into ESIP. Can we try and facilitate an online webinar with the publishers to start the conversation? Ted, you may now take the floor. I'm sorry.
Thank you, Leslie. And thank you for, protecting Susan from me. I had a different question, but Matt actually raised something that I wanted to talk about earlier, and return to Kirsten's second talk. I think it was on putting the air in fair. She was skipping the A, but that's a tagline that's hard to resist. So the A and the I and the R. And I just wanted to point out a talk that was given yesterday that some of you may have seen by Matt Jones from, in this case, the Arctic Data Center, And Matt showed some metadata quality checks system similar to what Matt was just sort of proposing that we developed in a project called Metadig a few years ago, an NSF project, and it's now being actively used by the Arctic Data Center. It's also being used by ESSDI from DOE. Joan is here from there. And instead of just, dealing with the 30,000-foot level that FAIR gives us, which is you should have numerous metadata elements, it actually for FAI and R describes a series of tests, checks similar to what Matt was just suggesting that give you scores back on FAI and R. And so all of this FAIR evaluation stuff that's going on is most of it is very high level. It's not actually that useful. In this case, these are actually detailed tests of metadata content that support all of those 4 use cases. And the amazing thing that Matt presented is that over time, you can see the metadata coming in from the community that's in the Arctic Data Center is actually improving. The metadata that's submitted along with data sets is actually improving over time. So this is actually a quantitative demonstration rather than a hand-waving exercise that actually shows that we can influence how communities create metadata by creating detailed metadata evaluation tools that evaluate the A and the I and the R as well as the F. And these things are existing and they're also running like operationally every day. So I mean, we can certainly create more working groups at RDA or at ESIP or anywhere, but actually we can actually use working running code that's been demonstrated to help communities make the improvements that we want them to make. And I would suggest that you look up Matt's talk when the videos become available, or ask him about this, or Joan may have an opinion about it too. But anyway, there's tools out there. They're designed for multiple metadata dialects. Let's go for it.
To Leslie's point about the publishers aren't at ESIP, right? And I don't think we've tried to bring them in.
The last question.
But my recommendation would be you go to where they are, right? You meet them where they are to convene and to gather the group of people you want to have. That could be done virtually, could be done in person. And I would say it's something, I mean, the CDF cluster could request special project funds from ESIP up to $5,000 to help make that happen, right? I mean, we can give you a Zoom link, but I think that conversation, I suspect, could use a little bit of active facilitation, given the amount of passion in the room. So, we could see where we could take that.
Yeah, I've just counted. We've got 16 people online and I think it's about 60 in the room, so 50 in the room. So this is one of the biggest meetings we've had. So thanks everyone for coming, and I hope it hasn't been a waste of time. But where we do integrate with the publishers, because they all have trade booths now, COVID killed them off a little bit, but they're starting to come back to the trade booths at like Kirsten looped them in the Goldschmidt conference last week. AGU they come, EGU they come. So that's our chance to get the publishers together, but then we don't find we have all the key repository people there as well, and the researchers. So it is a very difficult group to get together at a meeting. And if anyone knows of a society that has them together, please let me know. Yeah, so that's kind of the issue. So are there any questions online from people? They're all been edited. Okay. Sorry. We finished. We've got 15 more minutes. So is there any more discussion, any more ideas? We'd love to hear them.
Have those been upvoted by any? I see 0 and 0. They're just the first comments.
Oh, okay. So let's go back. Oh. Okay, so you want to run through them, or so please keep asking questions. Kirsten, you're a chair, you're online. Do you want to say anything?
No, I think this was a great discussion, and I'd love to answer some of these things, or get deeper into it, but I think we need to follow up on many of these things that have been brought up. I think that, getting together getting at the publishers is really a matter to either run very dedicated meetings, and this is how COPT started in 2014 with a workshop, and we had another workshop in the UK in 2015 that was supported by the Sloan Foundation. That's what really got it going, and yeah, I think that trying to do it through ESIP or at ESIP, let's say it at ESIP, will not work. So that would be my take.
Where? Oh, okay, go for it.
Yeah, I just have a comment. So we've talked a little bit about data availability statements, and I think it's great that journals have introduced them, but it doesn't seem like there's a lot of editorial oversight of what's in those data availability statements. And so the journal Ecology Letters just kind of released a policy to introduce editorial oversight and editing of data availability statements. So that's maybe one model we can look at and kind of encourage more of that kind of editorial oversight of this with publishers.
I think that leads on to another thing too, and Kirsten's often said this, and Shelley wants to say something. The issue is that we have, for some stuff like the COPT, the enabling fair data project, work with the publishers, and it didn't matter if you got the publishers on board because you still had to get to the editors. That's another major issue we have found. And the publisher policy can be like the journal where the author was told to take his data out of Iris and put it in Zenodo. That journal is one of the founding members of the COPT statement. So that was the journal going against, some editor or administrative person going against what was the policy. Shelley.
There's in our resources page, data.agu.org, under resources, we have no way. In that resources section, data.ag.org, under resources, there is a anatomy of an availability statement with examples. And in our author guidance, we also walk folks through. So I'm glad to hear the Ecology Journal, it has adopted something, but it's a free text field, and it's free text coming in the downstream services from publication. So it's a bit of a challenge. But one of the key elements of an availability statement is that you can identify all your data software, and the samples folks are going to add to that shortly, but you can't cite it all in the reference section. You can describe it, but not everything is actually citable. So when Christine is telling you that she's looking at the availability statement for those DOIs, that also includes in-text citations to the reference section. So she's actually accounting for both because of how we review the paper. So it's actually the better place to get the entire list. But yeah, if you want to compare the two, I would be interested if you see a difference between what we're asking for in the availability statement, what they're asking for. Maybe they took it from us. Wouldn't that be fun?
Okay, well, this is Matt Mernick again. Just a just to say explicitly what I think has been kind of implicitly said, which is that I think there does need to be some kind of systematic comparison between where people are putting their data and what data they're using, which is not necessarily the same thing. But there's always long tail effects and power law effects here, right? Which is what you're seeing in the Zenodo thing that's way above everything else. And there's probably this long tail. And you see the same thing with the usage of data sets, right? There are small numbers of data sets that get huge usage and then a huge long tail of the ones that don't. So just because there are thousands of data sets in Zenodo doesn't mean, you know, anybody besides the people are using them, with probably the exception of just a handful of them.
So I've often been accused, Steve Diggs, UCOP, of scaring the children. So I'd like to end on a much brighter note. A way to guarantee that we don't talk about this for decades. I have a session tomorrow, along with some of my colleagues. It's called Planting the Seeds for a Strong Data Management Future. And it's talking about educating early career researchers before they're early career researchers in graduate school. All of the concepts we talk about will be normalized. These people will come out and be the next generation of scientists, program managers, and policymakers, and we won't have to revisit this. So show up 10:30 tomorrow if you want to fix the problem.
Yeah, at the risk of perhaps beating a dead horse, I still want to talk about data availability statement versus citations of data that have been used in the paper. I'm looking at data availability statement as a thing that says, well, here is the data that I produced, and here you go to find my data. That's what I think a data availability statement would be. Not having read data requirements by different publishers for what should be covered in the data available statement. I'm just saying that that's my impression. And the references section should have references and citations of all the data sets that the people have used in developing the paper. And that should have the DOIs for the various data that have been used. Yeah, metadata should have the pronoun. He says dead, and I agree.
I just wanted to also put it on a little more positive note. About 20 years ago, I was giving a talk and I said, someday you will tell your graduate student that there was a time when you didn't share your data and they won't believe you. And at that point, it was a huge laugh line.
Bruce.
I think there's a piece to the puzzle. There's no one answer that solves all of this, but I want to bring out one of the points that came out fairly clearly. We had a workshop within the NASA world for airborne and field data. The number one conclusion that came out of that, the recommendation, is to get the repository assigned for the project at the point at which it is funded. Again, that works in some worlds and environments, but if the research team understands this is where your data should go at the point that the project is funded, that's one of the things that can help with the things. And that's now the funders, which is a whole nother bunch of folks that are kind of in this room and kind of not.
Okay, well, look, Shelley, well, we admit we almost didn't hold this session, so I think you're giving us encouragement that holding this session was worthwhile. And so I think I might start moving on. Or Christina, did you have a question you want to ask? Okay. So do I take as a vote? Do you want us to hold another session at the next ESIT meeting? No. As Danny said, she has been banging her head against a wall. Like, she's made progress, but we need help to make progress. So my key thing is, if you do believe in what Danny is doing, can you please send her an email or me an email and say, yes, I'd love to help you with your case statement, because really that's generated a lot of interest in Research Data Alliance to push that forward. And at the moment, it's still within a subgroup of the Earth, Space and Environmental Sciences group. So we still own it, but there. Oh, yeah, and don't forget the Earth, Space and Environmental Sciences Interest Group, thank you, is actually called the ESIP RDA group. And the reason it's called ESIP RDA was that we felt that where we had clusters in ESIP doing brilliant things, we could form these partnership groups with RDA to take our work to the international stage. And that's kind of what the data quality group has also done. So this is one of these ones that sort of got up to the next level. So please do participate in it. And again, if we're talking about another meeting, what would you like the focus to be on? Or, I mean, these are questions we need to answer because we can't keep meeting and going around in circles. And whether or not you want to try something with the publishers, you know, some form of meeting with the publishers, is that worth us investigating? Susan, do you want to say something? Oh, Ram's got his hand up.
I was just going to suggest in terms of next steps, right? Yes, like we want, I think we want to continue the discussion. I don't think we want to wait another year, right? I don't want Danny to have to add another data point to her timeline of we're still working on this and we haven't made meaningful progress. So, I mean, what I think is, okay, well, if you're in this room and you want to continue this discussion, maybe make sure on Schedule you add this session that you attended, right? And that would help Leslie and Shelley and Danny know who was in the room. And that would be the start of a list of people to work with, you know, whether it's through the CDF cluster, the interest group, like, how do we make sure we keep in touch with this group of people and say, okay, let's map out the next steps, right? It isn't gonna, you know, you aren't gonna take huge steps. You're gonna take 10 smaller steps, but maybe we take 5 of those 10 between now and the next meeting. And maybe it's through the interest group, but is everybody connected to that? So I'm trying to think how to get you all connected.
Yeah, well, Chairman Farrell, sorry, can we go back an hour and a half? You know, you got the meeting notes, you'll need to put your name and affiliation in that. If you haven't already done so, please do before you go out the door. Okay, so Rama's got a suggestion.
Coincidentally, I had typed something in the chat box there, or whatever that is displayed there. And I heard the same words from Bruce just a minute ago. And it's about funding organizations to be requested to ask or required to ask whom they fund, whoever they fund, to you know, in their data management plans include the place where they're going to place their data. And that's, I think that would have a lot of leverage. And this group can get some of the funding organization members involved in the next meeting, for example, and discuss this in more detail. It's a simple idea, but it can be reinforced.
Sounds like a plan. Well, in the remaining minutes, does anyone have any other comments? Andrew, microphone.
I hate to be the pessimist, but with the recent release of the NIH's open data policy, they have to declare where they're storing their data in their data management plans. And what I'm seeing is that they're just making that decision to put it in Zenodo when they make their data management plan, right? Whatever's easiest for them, unless there's an incentive, they're going to default to the easiest requirement. So you have to make an incentive, otherwise they're just going to declare they're going to Zenodo.
Can I also make the point that Shelley has a generalist repository chart on the AGU website, and that lists all of them, Zenodo, Mendeley. And the most sobering fact on that is the size of the data sets that they take. It used to be that they had a 2 gig limit. They're now offering 2 terabytes. One of them's offering 2 terabytes of space. So through some of these generalist repositories, they can get serious space. Some they don't have to pay, some they do. But this is like I always felt we were the generalist repositories were only for, dare I say it, the tiddlywinks data sets, the really small ones. But the generalist ones are now stepping up their file size, and as they do, the problem just continues. So the last question. Oh, sorry.
If possible, I wanted to make a
I was just going to mention that.
Oh, hang on, Kirsten's trying to say something as well. Kirsten, go. And I was going to say, is there anything from anyone online? Kirsten, go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, I wanted to add to that a different, more positive twist for the domain repositories. What we are seeing in our community is that there is a growing use of data for, statistical, for AI, ML applications. And researchers realize that the data in Zenodo are not usable. They need the domain repositories to have the data in a format that makes them analysis ready. And I think that's where the trend is heading back to a more sophisticated curation. And those researchers are big advocates now for our facilities. So, I mean, that's just a different tendency.
Okay. Anyone else online? Final comment, right? Because we've got two here and then we're finishing. Go for it.
I just wanted to say NSF is developing policy for their data management plans, and they say January 2025, they're going to come out with like where your data needs to be. So who knows what that will be exactly, but we can influence that, hopefully. Right, but well, it's going to be in when you do your NSF report, and you have to say where your data is and have an actual URL that points to it. So that's what they're going to require. So you won't get your next round of funding if you don't have the link.
My program already does that.
Yeah.
Well, we'll see. We'll see.
Okay, can we just finish with Shelley? You're good, okay.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.